Welcome to The Source, where we combine the headlines with in-depth conversations with the newsmakers themselves. I'm Pinky Webb. Today on the program, Philippine defense officials expressing concern over China's new law authorizing its Coast Guard to fire at foreign vessels. The Foreign Affairs Department won't bring up this law before the United Nations. That's after it filed a diplomatic protest with China late last month. But China maintains there's nothing to be worried about. Chinese ambassador to the Philippines says that no strong measure will be carried out against any fishermen plying the contested waters. Retired Senior Associate Justice Antonio Carpio joins us live. The Defense Secretary and the new Chief of the Armed Forces are concerned over the new Chinese law allowing its Coast Guard to fire at foreign vessels. AFP Chief Cirilito Sobejana described the law as alarming and very irresponsible. He adds they will increase visibility in contested areas through the deployment of more naval assets because of the perceived threat brought about by the new measure. Defense Secretary Delfin Lorenzana, on the other hand, cited the increased possibility of accidents and miscalculations in contested waters amid the implementation of this new law. Let's go straight to the source of this story. We have retired Supreme Court Senior Associate Justice Antonio Carpio. Justice Carpio, welcome to the source. Good to see you again.
Good morning, Pinky. Thank you for having me.
So the DFA already filed a diplomatic protest over this new Chinese Coast Guard law. Can you tell us, first and foremost, what would be the implication or the possible effect of this diplomatic protest?
Well, our protest simply means that we do not agree to this new law because this new law authorizes the Chinese Coast Guard to fire at our vessels even when our vessels are within our EEZ or exclusive economic zone. China can adopt that kind of a law, but they cannot enforce that law outside of their jurisdiction. And their jurisdiction extends only up to their extended continental shelf. That's very far from the EEZ of the Philippines. So, in fact, this law of China violates UNCLOS. It also violates the United Nations Charter, which says you cannot settle disputes through armed force. And firing at the vessels of other countries is use of armed force, which is prohibited by international law to settle disputes among states.
So very clearly under the UN Charter or the UNCLOS, Justice, it is said there that any problem in the contested waters, you cannot use armed force to settle the issue.
That is correct, Pinky, because that is the foundation of the United Nations Charter. That was the agreement of all the members of the UN when they formed the United Nations, because before 1945, before the adoption of the UN Charter, the use of force was allowed to settle disputes, to acquire territory or maritime zones. That's why we had 2 world wars before the UN Charter was adopted. And since then, since 1945, we have avoided world wars because of that provision. It's against international law to use force to settle any kind of dispute between states. You have to go through negotiation, mediation, or arbitration. And if you violate that law, that provision of the UN Charter, you become a rogue state, and the UN Security Council can, in fact, sanction you.
Okay, so under that new Chinese Coast Guard law, it actually says that it authorizes the CCG or the Chinese Coast Guard to take all necessary measures. It permits the Chinese Coast Guard to use handheld weapons when foreign vessels resist orders from the Chinese Coast Guard. There's a problem, there's a big problem here, Justice Carpio, because what is claimed by China is claimed by the Philippines. It is claimed by Brunei. It is claimed by Indonesia. It's claimed by Malaysia.
Yes, as far as the Philippines is concerned, legally there is no more dispute because the tribunal, international tribunal under UNCLOS already said that we have a full exclusive economic zone in the West Philippine Sea. So although China doesn't recognize that, that's the problem of China because under international law, uh, our exclusive economic zone has been affirmed. So China cannot say that it's still disputed legally. It's no longer disputed legally. So if China takes action, fires on a fishing vessel of the Philippines in the EEZ of the Philippines in the West Philippine Sea, that violates international law. However, in the case of Vietnam, Vietnam has not secured a ruling from an
Right.
UNCLOS tribunal. The arbitral ruling that we won is binding only between the Philippines and China. So we are in a better position because China cannot claim uh, that there is still a dispute legally. There is no dispute legally anymore.
Yeah. Even if, of course, they have disregarded this ruling at The Hague. So that was one of the options you had offered, that other claimant countries, such as Vietnam and Malaysia, and I believe Brunei, you said, can actually go to the International Tribunal and seek the same case, the same, almost the same case as the Philippines did.
That is correct, Pinky. We are in a better position. What Vietnam should do now is to file their own arbitration case, the same with Malaysia and Brunei and even Indonesia, so that they get a ruling and China cannot claim that it is in possession of their waters anymore because any possession of China of their waters will become illegal already because there is already a ruling. The ruling that we won binds only the Philippines and China because
Right.
that's the rule under international law. Uh, that's why China cannot say that they're in possession of the West Philippine Sea. They're no longer in possession. Any possession by China of the West Philippine Sea is already illegal because there is already that ruling.
But Justice, why is it that such countries as Vietnam, Malaysia, and even Brunei have not considered filing an arbitration case on their own, independently?
Well, there are different reasons. Uh, Vietnam has a long land border with China, and so it's very careful. Also, as far as I know, the ruling Politburo of Vietnam is divided. There is a pro-China faction and there is an anti-China faction. So they're very careful in their relationship with China. But of course, they're also fiercely protective of their own exclusive economic zone. But they have always been saying we will bring China to an UNCLOS tribunal, but they have not done so. But I think they are in that situation now because of this new law of China. China will fire on their fishing vessels, will destroy their oil rigs in their own EEZ that overlaps with China's 9-dash line. So they have to, they are under great pressure now to go to an UNCLOS tribunal.
That was one of the options you actually said the Philippines could take. We can go to the UN tribunal and declare this new Chinese Coast Guard law as void, as it violates not just the UNCLOS but also the UN Charter. And you explained that with this, basically, hindi pwedeng gumamit ng dahas. You cannot use force or weapons in settling disputes in the area of the South China Sea. Seems to be the problem here, Justice, is that the Foreign Affairs Secretary Locsin is against this. He actually said, well, I'm not going back there because the Coast Guard law has some claims as to the extent of their territory. That will reopen the arbitral award and I'm not going to give them a chance to do that. My question is, if this is brought to the UN and we want to declare it as void, will this actually reopen our legal victory at The Hague?
Well, it will not reopen, Pinky, but I think Secretary Locsin has already refined his position. He said if China uses that law against a Philippine vessel in the West Philippine Sea, then he will not only protest, he will do more.
Opo.
So actually, my recommendation is to wait for China to actually apply that law against the Philippines. If China fires on a Philippine vessel in the West Philippine Sea, that's the time we go to an UNCLOS tribunal. So actually, he in effect agrees with that because he said if China fires on a Philippine vessel, then I will not only protest, I will do more.
Yes.
So that's also my recommendation. Let's wait for China to apply that law to us and then bring that incident, that violation before an UNCLOS tribunal.
Right.
In the meantime, what I'm saying is we will prepare for that eventuality because, you know, to bring a case, you have to talk to lawyers and we must prepare for the day when China, because I think China will, if the, what I'm, my guess is that China will apply this law first against Vietnam, then probably against Malaysia, and eventually against the Philippines.
Yeah.
So we must prepare. But I'm not saying to go that we should go now.
I see.
We should wait for a violation.
It's almost like saying, Justice, that we need an actual case before we actually go to the UN.
Well, because it's speculative now. Because remember when President Duterte lifted the moratorium on oil and gas exploration in the West Philippine Sea, China officially said they will not stop us. They will not stop our survey vessels because there is a consensus. So there are two different signals from China. They said they will not stop us, and they passed this law. So let us wait what exactly China will do.
Yeah.
I will not recommend that we go now. I said from the very start that we wait for China to actually apply this law against us because that will make our case stronger. We will not only be speculating, we will be actually basing our action on an actual case, actual controversy.
Right. So I was able to interview the Chinese ambassador Wang Jilian about this, and he called it an internal legislation. We're going to talk about that, but we need to take a very short break. This is The Source on CNN Philippines. Please stay tuned. We're watching The Source on CNN Philippines. Our guest today, retired Supreme Court Senior Associate Justice Antonio Carpio. So that is very clear right now. We wait for an actual incident to happen before we file a protest before the UN. My question, Justice, is this. If there an incident actually happens and we file a protest with the UN, does that in any way or form affect our legal victory in the past?
No, Pinky, it will not affect it because we are actually going to an UNCLOS tribunal. And the basis of our case before this UNCLOS tribunal is that we have that ruling, and that ruling says the resources within our EEZ exclusively belongs to the Philippines, and China is stopping us from exploiting our resources, which the tribunal already ruled exclusively belongs to the Philippines. So we are not reopening. We are saying that China is violating that ruling, and we want the tribunal to declare the action of China void and to declare that law of China, the Coast Guard law of China, void because it violates not only UNCLOS but also it violates the UN Charter.
And if it is voided by the UN, but this is not going to be, but this is not something China will accept, such as the arbitral ruling, what happens next?
Well, the same. China will not participate. I would presume it will not also participate when we go to an Uncle's Tribunal, and it will also say that it will not comply with the ruling, but the world will tell China to comply, just like the world is telling China now to comply with the July 12th, the 2016 arbitral award. So we are putting pressure on China using international law that China should comply.
Right.
So, and in fact, we are getting the support of the rest of the world.
So I was able to interview Ambassador Wang Jilian, and I asked him about this new Chinese Coast Guard law. He said this is actually an internal legislation and it isn't a threat. Let's listen to what he said.
There are many countries in this world who have already enacted such Coast Guard laws, including many countries in this region. And for that such activity, I think that it shouldn't be seen as anything new, any threat.
It shouldn't be seen as anything new. It shouldn't be seen as a threat. But you have senators, you have the AFP chief, you have the defense secretary, all saying this is a cause for concern. What weight does it have to you that China is saying that it's just a domestic legislation and it should not be seen as a threat?
Well, a domestic legislation should apply only within the territory of China, at most within the maritime areas under its jurisdiction. So, yes, China can pass that law, but China cannot apply that law outside of Chinese territory or outside of Chinese maritime areas, outside of their jurisdiction. And the arbitral ruling already said that China has no jurisdiction over the West Philippine Sea because that is the exclusive economic zone of the Philippines. So no one can say that Chinese law can apply in the EEZ of the Philippines because the EEZ of the Philippines is not under Chinese jurisdiction. So China is saying that that kind of law is normal. Other countries have that. Yes, other countries have that law, but there is a big difference. Like our law, we do not apply our Coast Guard law outside of our territory or outside of our jurisdiction. You cannot do that. Because what China is saying, they're applying their domestic law to maritime areas that are within the exclusive economic zone of the Philippines. They cannot do that. That's against international law. And they don't have any jurisdiction over the EEZ of the Philippines in the West Philippine Sea. So I have pointed that out. Yes, China can adopt that law, but it cannot apply that law outside of the territory, outside of the maritime areas, beyond the jurisdiction of China.
Even if they continue to claim the 9-dash line.
Yes, they can, but the 9-dash line has been declared invalid as far as the Philippines is concerned.
Right. Which
So
they
that's why I'm
disregard.
saying Vietnam should also get a ruling, Malaysia should also get a ruling, so that they can all waive their rulings.
All right. Also, the Chinese ambassador said that there's no need to over-interpret the law. He was saying that this is not even directed at any specific country or even people. Let's listen again.
I think that we don't hope to see any over-interpretation of the China Coast Guard law. The Coast Guard law of China is aimed at cracking down on those extremely vicious crimes only. And that is not targeted at any specific country or any specific group of people. And there was no change in terms of China's foreign policy and no change in the action of China Coast Guard before or after the formulation of the China Coast Guard law.
Can I get a quick reaction from you on that, Justice?
course, the Chinese law is directed at us because China is saying they can apply that law in the West Philippine Sea. But the West Philippine Sea is our exclusive economic zone as affirmed by the tribunal. So China is saying they can apply that in the West Philippine Sea because they own the West Philippine Sea. But they don't own the West Philippine Sea. There's already a ruling on that. So that's a very ingenious way of saying. Like we have our own Coast Guard law. We can use force to protect our territorial sea, our exclusive economic zone. But we cannot use force outside of those areas. We cannot use force in the EEZ of Vietnam. And it's only China, among all countries in the world, it's only China that is saying that they can use their domestic law in the exclusive economic zone of other countries. There's no other country that's doing that. So this is very unique. This is an aberration of international law. China is destroying international law. China is trying to change international law so that its hegemonic ambitions can be realized. So all countries in ASEAN and all over the world should oppose this. Because if China succeeds in saying that their domestic law can apply in the EEZ of the Philippines, in the EEZ of Indonesia, Brunei, Malaysia, and Vietnam, then UNCLOS will collapse. There will be no UNCLOS anymore.
We need to talk about even other options and what government plans to do, such as patrolling the area, increased naval patrols around the area. But we need to take another short break. This is The Source on CNN Philippines. Please stay tuned. You're watching The Source on CNN Philippines. Our guest today, retired Supreme Court Senior Associate Justice Antonio Carpio. Justice, you know, Secretary Delfin Lorenzana also very concerned about this new Chinese Coast Guard law. And he actually used the word miscalculation. What happens if there's a miscalculation? Let's just quickly listen to what the Secretary said.
Yeah, I'm very concerned, Pinky, about this law, no? Because it might cause miscalculations and accidents there. Especially that they are not allowed to fire at foreign vessels.
That's a big possibility. Miscalculation. Why? Because what China claims as theirs, other countries claim as ours.
Yes, this is a very grave escalation of the dispute in the South China Sea. Because if China now will use armed force, will fire on vessels of Vietnam, Malaysia, Brunei, Philippines, and Indonesia, then, if they do that to the Philippines, it will escalate because we will use the Mutual Defense Treaty. They will say there's an armed attack on a Philippine public vessel, and we will invoke the treaty.
Right.
And it will really escalate. So we have to use the rule of law here. Yeah. That's why I'm saying before things escalate out of hand, let us find a way to bring this to an UNCLOS tribunal so that the parties can discuss this and litigate this before a tribunal where we follow the rule of law. Because we cannot allow China to use armed might. China is saying might is right. We have to change that concept. Right is might. We have to bring the dispute to an UNCLOS tribunal where the rule of law will govern.
But as
because
you mentioned,
if we fall into the strategy of China, that this will be resolved in armed clashes in the South China Sea, I don't think that is the way to go for us.
Justice, there's a question here from a netizen. Bakit kailangan pang hintayin na may insidente sa fishermen o mga Pilipino bago mag-act against the law? Why wait for an incident to happen before we go to the UN and declare the Chinese Coast Guard law as void?
First of all, we're going to an UNCLOS tribunal, not to the UN General Assembly.
Yes.
And in an UNCLOS tribunal, there has to be an actual case, actual controversy. So China can always say that, we're not applying the law against you. So we have to wait for an actual case where there is a violation that will strengthen our position because we are challenging a law. We're
Right.
not challenging a violation. Like, for example, when we went to the tribunal the last time in 2012, the specific violation there was that China seized Scarborough Shoal. So here we have to wait for a specific violation by China.
And we can't just go to the UNCLOS tribunal and declare this void because it actually goes against the UN Charter.
That law violates the UN Charter, but China can always say, we are not using it. We're not applying it against anyone. So it does not threaten anyone. So we have to wait for an actual case
I
here.
see.
And I think it will happen soon because there is more tension now in the EEZ of Vietnam and the EEZ of Malaysia. So we don't have to wait for too long for an incident. But in the meantime, we must prepare. We should discuss with our lawyers now the processes
Okay.
so that the moment an incident happens, we can go immediately to an UNCLOS tribunal, not to the General Assembly,
Yes.
but to a tribunal under the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea.
Yes, sir. So the Navy is already saying that they will increase patrols in the West Philippine Sea. Could this actually be, do you think this could actually be a threat to China now that we will actively resume or increase patrols around the WPS?
Well, when we send our public vessels, our Coast Guard or Navy ship, to our own EEZ, it is not a threat against any country because it is within our jurisdiction.
Right.
We are exercising a right under international law. When you exercise a right, you do not threaten anyone. Legally, there is no threat.
Pagka lumampas na po dun sa EEZ, then possibly that becomes a threat. I have 20 seconds left, Justice. Just very quickly, how does this actually affect the MOUTOR of the oil and gas exploration between the Philippines and China?
That's a very good question, Pinky, because if you recall, when the President Duterte lifted the moratorium on oil and gas exploration, the Chinese, many foreign ministers said they have no objection because there is a consensus already between the Philippines and China on exploration. So China, they said they will, there is a consensus, and at the same time they passed this law. So we have to be very careful here. We have to see what exactly is the intention of China with respect to the MOU and TOR. So I think we will know soon because China will have to make its move here. So my advice is we wait for Chinese action as far as the MOU and TOR is concerned because they are sending conflicting signals. Thank you.
Retired Supreme Court Senior Associate Justice Antonio Carpio, sir, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Pinky.
Thank you for joining us here on The Source. I'm Pinky Webb. You're watching CNN Philippines.